Hey, it's Kevin DeWitt here. Welcome to the next video in the Setting Up a Home Music Studio course. In this video, we're going to talk about computers. So we're going to talk about computers in this video, and it's a crucial part of the home music studio these days. You know, in the past, usually, you would have had separate little dedicated recording devices, which might have recorded to tape or anything like that. But today, everything's done on computers. Now, there's obviously still old school ways to do things, but we're going to talk about computers because it's the most efficient way to do recording these days, and most people are doing it that way. Now, generally with your computers, you're going to have two choices from a major perspective, and that is PC, like a Windows-based system, or a Apple Mac-based system. So that's probably your first decision point. Now, obviously, if you've already got a computer and it's suitable for what you want to do in your recording and mixing, then there really is no choice. That's what you're going to be using. But if you are looking at buying a new PC or a new Mac and you want to work out what you should get because you're going to make an investment to it, or you want to get a dedicated PC or Mac purely for your home music studio and not utilize your existing PC that you do your internet surfing and social media and everything else on, then that's great, and we'll talk about all of that. Now, if you can't afford it, it is advisable that a dedicated machine, if you seriously want to get into the recording and mixing side of things seriously, especially if you want to run a business, is advisable because you can control what you do on it. You don't need to do software updates as often. You can protect it from viruses more, and you can prevent clashes between different applications. With your general home PC or Mac that you're using for your day-to-day operations and your kids are on or your wife's using, it's a bit harder to control, and sometimes it becomes unreliable and viruses get on, as I said. Certain applications get installed, somebody does an OS upgrade to the latest version of Apple Mac software, and suddenly your DAW audio recording software stops working. Now, which PC you choose, whether it's a Microsoft Windows-based PC or a Apple Mac PC, is entirely up to you, okay? In the past, there was a tendency that everybody wanted to use Apple Macs. Most of the software worked on the Apple Macs. They were a lot more reliable, and they were definitely more sought after for audio recording PCs. But today, the Windows-based systems have become a lot more reliable, a lot more powerful, and the applications themselves are running on them a lot more efficiently. And you don't have that problem anymore. So really, either choice is acceptable and either choice is fine. And which one you choose out of those two is really entirely up to you. It's going to be based on a few factors. One is price, budget. Can you afford it? You want to get the most bang for your buck out of this. Secondly, which one are you most comfortable with? If you're using a Windows PC for your entire life, switching over to an Apple Mac now just for your recording side is going to be painful because you have to learn the new operating system. You need to learn all of the features about it, the restrictions, everything else. And same, vice versa. If you're an Apple Mac user, going out and buying a PC now is something that you're probably going to have to, again, learn. You're going to have to learn the restrictions on that, how to use what you can, what software you can get, and everything else. Now, from a physical hardware point of view, whether you choose PC or Mac, there are many options again in that realm. You can go for a laptop style. You can go for a mini form sort of PC, small compact unit. You could go for a big, large, thumping sort of big server chassis-based system that you can expand, enhance, and upgrade as you go along. You can do that with either system. Again, cost is going to come into it. The choice of a laptop is going to come in if you need portability. If you want to be able to take your system out to clients in their facilities and record, then you may want to get a laptop. as opposed to getting a dedicated PC that just sits still and can't be moved. Now, whichever choice you make, you want to make sure that it meets the specifications of the software that you're going to use to do your recording. Okay, there's no point getting a budget PC that just is not going to cut it for your software, and it's going to crash all the time and it's just not going to perform. You're just not going to be happy with it. You're going to be fighting it all the time. Now, on the flip side, you don't want to go out and spend lots and lots of money, and you just don't need that power. And before you even get to the point of requiring that amount of power, your PC will be so out of date you will want to replace it. So consider the future, consider what you need now, consider the future, but don't go and buy something that you think is going to last 20 years, because not many people keep a PC for 20 years these days. Some do, but it's very rare, and more than likely most people are replacing or upgrading their equipment every 3 to 5 years. You know, you might push it a little bit beyond that, but just consider that as you make your decision. So when you're picking your computer, what you want to look for is the CPU speed. Okay, these software programs to record on that are very CPU intensive. They've got to record audio live as you're playing them. They've got to perform well. If they can't keep up, they're going to crash and you're going to have all sorts of problems. Your recordings are not going to come out. They're just not going to work. Your music's going to stutter as you try to play it. And depending on what you do with it, you know, how much virtual instruments and synth and things like that that you load into your software is also going to have an impact on that. Now, with a CPU, you want to find the sweet spot. Okay, there's usually the budget price, which you want to stay away from. There's the top of the line, you know, brand new CPU that's just been released. It's the most powerful one out there at all. That's going to be like 4 or 5 times the price of anything else. So I wouldn't go there either. What I'd find is there's usually a nice sweet spot where you get a very powerful CPU that's going to last you, you know, quite a few years, but it's also not at the top of the line price, not at the extreme end of it. Now, they're not going to be really cheap either, but you just want to find that spot where it's not too cheap, but not too expensive. Now, the other major component that you want to worry about when you're picking your computer is the amount of RAM you get. As I stated, this software can take quite a lot of memory to run them, and especially if you're using things like virtual instruments, amp simulations, things like that, they are going to take up a lot of memory. So you're going to want to get as much memory as you can fit into your budget. Now, I would say don't go any lower than 8 gig of RAM. Ideally, I would be suggesting 16 gig is probably a nice spot that's going to last you a long time. I myself have moved up to 32 gig, but then I'm running this as a business and I'm using this quite a lot. So I've gone more for the top end of the extremes, but 16 gig is a nice starting spot. Now, if you get a PC system, sometimes those decisions, while they're key, are not so much locked in because you have the possibility to upgrade those sort of items as you go along. With the Apple side of the products or the laptops, you can be locked in and they're not really upgradable. So you really need to think about price and power more in those regards, because once you've bought them, it's almost impossible to upgrade them. So it's going to be a full replacement to get any more power or any more RAM into those systems. So the next component in the system is going to be the hard disks that are in there. So generally in the past you would have a standard hard drive, the old clunky style hard drives in your computers, and you'd want one for your operating system to boot the computer off, and then you would get a second one to record onto. And that second one should always be a 7200 RPM, not a 5400 RPM. You want that speed because you're recording audio onto it live. And they're usually quite big. You can get terabytes of data onto them. Now, we've moved into a position now where solid state drives or SSDs, which are sort of more like memory-based drives, are becoming a lot more affordable and a lot more common. Most laptops and PCs these days are coming with SSDs as their main boot drive that run their operating system. Now, I've done that in my computer, and I would suggest that's the smartest way to go. The computers boot up a lot faster, and they just run way smoother with these SSDs. Now, with the SSD as your main operating system boot drive, you still want to have a second drive, at least one more drive, to do the recording of the audio on. It's still more efficient to record the audio on a second drive to what your computer is actually running off. Now, you can do that two ways. You can use it the old way, which is to get a big standard hard drive that's 7,200 RPM to record onto. Or what I've moved to now is I've actually gone to a process where I have a second SSD drive that I sort of labeled as in progress, and I do my recording and mixing of current sessions and projects on that drive. Then what I have, because SSDs are still fairly expensive for size, that's not a massive drive. Okay, it might be say 512 gig, but then I'll have another drive, which is your standard old hard drive, that will be terabytes of data. And once I've finished projects, I'll then archive them onto the other hard drive. So you could use that same methodology if you have the budget and you have the capacity to fit that into your PC, or obviously plug it in externally to your laptop or whatever you decide to purchase. Now, the other obvious things you need with your computer, especially if you're getting a tower-based server computer or a little small form factor computer, is you're going to need a monitor or a screen to obviously see the software on and the computer. And I like to get a nice big one because when you're recording and mixing and stuff, you're doing a lot of editing of audio. You can get quite detailed and the programs are quite complicated, and you can fit a hell of a lot on the screen. So I find a nice big screen a good option to go with, but obviously you need to consider what size desk you are going to get and go back to the previous steps and think about that and how that's all going to fit on your desk. Are you going to have room for the monitor and your speakers as well, and how that's all going to lay out? So it's going to factor into the size of the screen, but I always like to get a nice big screen, one that obviously fits into my budget again and is practical. Now, screen is easily replaceable in the future, right? So unless you're buying an iMac, which is the computer and the screen together, if you do that, then obviously you're locked into whatever you buy. But if you're buying a separate monitor screen to plug it into your computer, then size can be changed later. You can replace that monitor later as they become cheaper and bigger. Now, if you decided to get a laptop, I still advise getting a separate monitor to plug into the laptop. I don't like really working on little laptop screens. Now, obviously, if you are working portably or you're sitting on your bed or a couch or something like that, and you just want to tweak on there, then that's fine. But if I'm working in my home music studio and I'm sitting at my desk, I want an external monitor, even if I'm running a laptop. I don't want to be looking at a laptop screen. So I'm going to convert that laptop basically into a standard PC. Now, on top of that, you also need to then have a keyboard and a mouse, which obviously will go with all the options there. And there's nothing special about those. Just pick something that looks good, it's comfortable, fits on the desk, and you're happy with, because there's nothing really extreme with those. If you want to use a lot of keyboard commands, shortcuts in things like Pro Tools and stuff like that, then you might want to look at a keyboard that has a numeric pad on it, because they have certain shortcuts and key commands that require that numeric pad. But other than that, any keyboard is pretty much sufficient for what you need. Obviously match it to your system. Okay, don't get a Windows keyboard if you're running a Mac OS. Get a Mac keyboard, and vice versa. If you've got a Windows PC, get a Windows keyboard, not a Mac keyboard. Now, if you are unsure of whether you want to go for the Windows PC or the Mac, and you're pretty much open to either option, think about which recording software you're going to use. And we're going to talk about that in another video, so this may be something that you need to come back and revisit, because it is going to dictate which software you can get to a point. Some software only works on one or the other. For instance, the obvious ones are GarageBand and Logic Pro only work on an Apple. So if you buy a Windows PC, instantly those two pieces of software are crossed off the list. Most of the other ones will work on either system, so you're pretty much right. But just keep that in mind. And again, it might be something you have to come back and revisit this once you've checked out the video on the actual recording mixing software. So again, with all the other videos, if you have any questions about this, if you are unsure about certain things that you're looking for in your PC and you want to ask me questions, please do so in the comments. Happy to help. I do have a bit of a background in IT, so I may be able to help a bit. I'm not an absolute expert on PCs though, but I do have an IT sort of brain, so I can probably work out most things. I've built my own computer and everything else. So if you have any questions, please ask them in the comments. Happy to help. Again, no stupid questions. Every question is valid. Every question is appropriate. So I'm happy to answer all of them because I want you to get the right system for you. So now it's your turn to go to the PDF, get the worksheets and fill it out. Even if you already have a PC or a Mac and you are going to use that, fill it out in the sheet so it's written down, it's locked down. You've basically ticked it off the list as an item to get because you've already got it. If you obviously aren't and you're looking to buy, do some research, have a look at some pricing, see what fits into your budget, what you can get, what you're thinking of leaning towards, and write it down on the worksheet so you're ready to go and purchase. And while you're doing that, I will see you in the next video.